The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... Three, two, here we go. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Greer, the researcher, medical doctor, and leading authority on the subject of UFOs. In 1993, you founded the Disclosure Project in order to make public the U.S. government's knowledge of UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence and push for the amnesty of government whistleblowers. Since then, you have provided briefings for sitting U.S. presidents alongside senior government officials across the globe. You've written 5 books and produced a number of high-profile documentaries regarding extraterrestrial life, government cover-ups, and detailed stories of close encounters. You ultimately believe there is a highly secretive and powerful international cabal that is misusing this extraterrestrial technology instead of using it to provide free energy to the world. Dr. Greer, welcome back to London Real.
Good to be with you and good to see you again.
Great to have you here. I wanted to jump in and talk about, your latest announcement, which is your Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, 34 years of your work that is now online and searchable. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that, because I believe it's all of your research, evidence from military and government contract whistleblowers, the whole nine. What is in there and why is it important now that the public can access it?
Well, I will tell people that if the Congress were to hold hearings on this subject for a year, from 9 in the morning till 5 p.m., there'd be less testimony and less information than what we just released. That is a fact. One of the reasons I put it together is about 3 years ago, senior people with the Senate Intelligence Committee asked me to help them get to the bottom of this. And I went into a SCIF, which is a secure compartmented information facility, and gave them an initial briefing. And they said, well, what more do you have? So we have everything. I have 760 whistleblowers, and we have 120 on camera with their credentials. And we have 150 plus black sites that are operational or have been operational on this issue. So they said, well, we need to get that. So these were all in my files. They were digitized. And so initially, they thought they would get the funding to put about 30 people together to create the master digitized intelligence file on the subject. They couldn't do that, so we did it ourselves. So it's cost us about $500,000 and about 2 or 3 years putting this together. But it's everything we've collected in 34 years. So it's a huge archive dump of intelligence. And you just go into one section, government documents. It's thousands of pages of government documents. And they're organized by government, Great Britain, United States, Canada. And I mean, there's smoking guns in there. So if you look at the witness testimony, I think we have like 120 named witnesses from military and corporate in there. And these are direct witnesses. These are not secondhand, like the Senate, the House Oversight Committee had some people who are mostly secondhand people, except for pilots. We have many pilot encounters, much more important than the Tic Tac and others that are better documented. So it's an enormous collection of intelligence, evidence, and it really unpacks the entire mystery going back to the 40s, at least, or before.
Wow. Correct me if I'm wrong. I seem to recall in our last conversation that you said you had some documents that you were holding maybe as insurance on your life, that people knew that if something happened to you that they would be released. First of all, am I recalling that correctly? Do you still hold those documents? And why are those so sensitive that it could potentially keep you alive?
Well, yes. I mean, you can only imagine having met with over 1,000 whistleblowers over the years. Now, there's 760 of them named in this archive, but the archive to the public that you'll see is heavily redacted for people's personal information. Now, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and House Oversight have received the unredacted material. Now, what no one has received is the files you're referring to. And these are the most sensitive files that we have kept, as we call it, a dead man trigger, away from anybody that would be released if I were to be killed, what have you. And I was advised to do that in the 1990s. So that file keeps changing. So, for example, there's an entire team of people in the process of defecting from the upper echelons of these covert programs. They're talking about perhaps doing what they call a catastrophic disclosure, where they would just release to me and to the public video footage of the retrievals of ET craft and the downing of other craft and the reverse engineered craft that they test out at the black sites out west. Now, just before I was critically injured in October, I don't know if you know that, I was almost killed. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, it's not important. I'm okay now. But
I would say it is actually very important, Dr. Greer. We spoke in September, so I would have missed that.
This was in October.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It was an accident. It was a strange accident. But at any rate.
Can you tell us more?
Oh, well, I mean, I was mountain biking and it appears someone tampered with the seat and the seat snapped off at high speed and my left foot came off and my two bones in my left leg were in the air and open fractures and my left shoulder was ripped off and my abdomen was torn open. So, I had 4 surgeries in 3 months, but I'm back. I mean, I'm, kind of back in the gym and back hiking. So it's been 7 months of rehab, but, here we go. It's been a story of my life, but
wow.
It happened 30 days after I came back from a black site where I was on a classified helicopter over 2 sites where this team who wants to come forward have electromagnetic pulse weapons where they target both the ET craft and test the man-made UFOs. So some of this information with names redacted is also in this file, and also photos and videos of these black sites. Now, the new video that I took when I was in the chopper has not been released. I have given it to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So they didn't even know of these sites, by the way. They had no idea they existed. So
they're in America, I assume.
Yes, they're in the deserts. And by the way, Ben Rich was right. Before he died, he told James Goodall, the famous aerospace historian, that the real action isn't at Area 51, it's out in the desert with the Lockheed Skunk Works and some other facilities. That's where I was. So I was over those facilities and I actually have a great video of the underground opening where the man-made UFOs come out and then they're tested by these electromagnetic pulse. They're these huge generators. People know electromagnetic pulse is what you get from an atomic explosion or nuclear. But we have been able to create those separate from the atomic explosion itself. Now, those are illegal under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but they're used all the time. And some are portable. They're on aircraft, satellites, fixed. At this place, I saw multiple of them, and they were spaced around where we would put up, say, a Lockheed aircraft that's an anti-grav or a Northrop Grumman facility. There are different places where I went, and these would then target them to hit them to see how hardened they were against that kind of EMP attack. but they are also used for tracking ET craft and knocking them down. And this one site I was over, the operator, his senior operator there, in whose helicopter I was flying, along with the director of a sensitive intelligence group, that I'll talk about in a moment, who was in the back seat. I was in the front, pilot. And he explained to us that that's about once or twice a year, just that one site knocks down an extraterrestrial vehicle. And of course, then he helps in the process of retrieving and the bodies, as well as the airform, the craft itself. So
this is New Mexico, I'm assuming.
No, sir.
Okay, but one of the desert states, probably
Yes.
next to it. Okay.
Yeah, but one of the fun things is for people to go on the map. We have a black site map in the archive, and I think it's 152 or 155 sites now. We keep adding to them. So what we do as we get intelligence firsthand from these sort of sources, we put it on a map, and then we have a little explanation of what's there, what's been operational, or if there's an event. And some of them are episodic. In other words, a craft went down, it was taken to Fort Hood, and here's the case, and here's how it happened. Others were permanent sites. And the big ones, of course, people have heard about Edwards Complex. They've heard about, Nellis. They've heard about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Most people haven't heard about Dugway, Utah, the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is the state-of-the-art facility. And we have a whistleblower from there who has joined with our team and helped our illustrators draw what that underground facility looks like there. It's a huge facility. And
Wow.
also where some of the above ground. So all that is in the archive. So
Okay.
this is basically about $20 million in work we've done over 34 years that were given to the public. Say, here it is. Now we're also giving it to the members of Congress and military office of the White House and the House Oversight Committee people. But so far, none of those people have a staff to really do a deep dive into this. They don't have a select committee that's been stood up. That's what we've been asking for. And unfortunately, I found out about a month ago that the House Oversight Committee is going to be denied select committee status and funding or subpoena power. And this is, of course, not good news. And it's happened because of some bad actors who are in the House who have blocked it. And I know who they are. All right. We can get into that in a moment.
Okay.
So,
and Edwards is in California, right? And then Area 51
correct.
is in New Mexico. And I'm guessing
No, that's in Nevada.
Oh, Nevada. Okay.
Is Nevada. Mm-hmm.
And maybe you were in Utah, perhaps. And then there's New Mexico. But
I go all over. So, of course, this gets into sources and methods. I have to be careful.
yeah.
This particular team, the reason this is so important, if the Congress and the president don't act, there are two alternative disclosure pathways. One, we've just done. We've released everything I have, except the things that I cannot release right now. But it's plenty. It's more than you would get ever from a congressional hearing. But number two, the other pathways are, number one, the group that's organizing to break away, who are currently operational in these illegal projects. And they know what they're doing is unsanctioned by the government. But they're ultimately patriots, and they're horrified at what they're doing, to be honest with you. I mean, emotionally shaken. So, and they've been in this system for 20, 25 years, some of them. It's particularly the senior guys that I'm working with. The other pathway, and I've introduced these two leaders, is a law enforcement strike force that's been being stood up that would hit all these sites under domestic laws of the places where illegal activity is happening. Now, so far, they've not become operational. It's in its organizational form. But a big announcement, this is the first time I can say this on your show, effective June 20th, so a week from tomorrow, a group that's operated under SAP, a Special Access Project, has been authorized to provide protection to any and all whistleblowers who want to come forward. This is a very big deal. We've been asking for this since the Clinton administration, and it has just been finally a group has organized to do it. So that will be effective June 20th. And what that means is someone can come forward, named or anonymous or confidential, give their information, and they will be protected, monitored, and any threats that would come their way, a criminal file will be opened, and the people threatening them will be prosecuted. So I cannot say what agency in the United States that is operating under. I've been asked not to. It's highly classified. It's operating under top secret special access project status, but I'm working with those folks, and that is now activated as of next week.
Wow, that's a huge development.
It's huge, yeah.
And your dead man file, I would assume, has information that might reveal the identities of some of the people in the cabal or the activities, and so then they leave you alone because they don't want that potential exposure. Am I getting that probably right?
That's part of it. Who they are, how they operate, where they're located.
Okay.
And many of them, quite a few of them I've met with.
Oh, really?
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, sure. Because
Do
they tried
know
to turn me.
Know?
You know,
and they know that you know.
Oh, of course they know I know. And they know what I have. I mean, there's nothing hidden, but there's information that is so shocking. And, you know, a little bit over the years I've talked about, you know, like when the head of Army Intelligence offered me in 1992, $2 billion in illegally gotten black funds from the fall of the Soviet Union to defect, be part of their little clique of goose-stepping freaks. And I had turned that aside. I said, I'm uninterested. But, you know, we know who those people are and how that whole system runs and how the money is moved around. By the way, there's a whole section in the archive on just the black budget and all of that. And there's a lot to be added. Let me point out, this is a quasi-emergency release of this archive. It's not finished. And the reason we did it before everything, every, you know, T is crossed and I is dotted, is because the speed at which not the U.S. government, Congress, but these other two initiatives are moving. They're more aggressive, and we feel that the public and also staff members and people at the National Security Council and Senate Intelligence, Armed Services, House Oversight, they need all this information to the extent they have time to go through it. Now, one thing we've spent a great deal of time and money creating is a searchable archive. All this had to be put into a database. Then it had to be coded, custom coded. The website had to be custom built. And we're still working out some bugs with it. So, you know, be patient, but it's the best we can do with our limited staff.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's a huge development. We're going to have a link below so people can go there. Also, there's a crowdfunding platform to help you support the cost it takes to host it and everything else you're doing.
Excuse me.
So
yes, well, I want to point out the only reason it's free is that we have had some benefactors do some startup support. But the way this works, folks, the more people who are using it, and it's huge how many people are getting in there, we get charges from the Amazon cloud and from a lot of other vendors to provide that. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. So we are crowdfunding it, just like Wikipedia has to be funded. You know, we have external costs separate from our own staff that are quite high. Just hosting something this vast that people can peruse for free. So if you can support the crowdfunding, we very much appreciate it.
Dr. Greer, let me ask you a question. It looks like we have a potential of a new president coming into office in November/January. Well, what's the possibility that Trump comes in and, you know, calls you up and says, we want to get to the bottom of this. We want to expose all of this. First of all, how much power does he have to do that? I've heard you talk before about how Trump and Pence were given some misinformation, disinformation about the process when they were in power. And then maybe relate that back to these people in Congress that are currently blocking the setup of this subcommittee.
Yes, it's a very important question. The likelihood is 99%. Okay, because many people on both presidential candidates' teams are working with me at a very high level. But in terms of the former president, it's a 50-50 coin toss, as you know, in any of these elections lately. But yes, we do know, because of some close friends of Mr. Pence and Trump, that they were approached from people, by people who provided a false flag level of disinformation to them. Now, they provided some information that was legitimate. And the best disinformation is always coded. It's like a poison pill. It tastes sweet on the outside, on the inside, it's the poison. And, you know, if you're a real estate developer or a former governor of Indiana or a former senator like Mr. Obama or Mr. Biden, you're not going to know what's in these illegally run black projects. And it's very easy to gaslight them and deceive them. So what we try to do is to be a counterbalance to that, because we're non-governmental and we're nonpartisan. And so our only interest is getting the truth to the people, the general public, but also to these leaders who have been deceived for, well, all the way back to the Eisenhower term. Now, in the case of Mr. Trump, we know for a fact that he was, unfortunately, really provided some virulent disinformation, particularly about the threat posed by the extraterrestrials, which is a false flag from start to finish. I mean, any common sense scientist would know civilizations that advanced, if in fact they were hostile, it would have been all over in 1945 when we detonated the first atomic weapon. And that, by the way, sent out an electromagnetic pulse that had attached to it a scalar signal that rips the fabric of trans-dimensional space-time for communication and travel. That's why the ET showed up in such large numbers, because it's actually disruptive to that level of physics, which we can talk about if it may be not appropriate for your audience. But what I'm saying is, these presidents are sitting ducks, or in the very tightly compartmented world of special access projects and top secret special compartmented information. Who are they going to turn to? Well, it's the foxes in the hen house who would know about this, and they're going to provide almost always, they'll either deny access altogether, like they did to Clinton and Carter and some others, or they're going to gaslight them the way they did President Reagan and Trump. So this is a fundamental problem that I've known about since 1993, when I briefed the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton, and realized that he wasn't joking when he said, I don't have access to these projects, and neither does the president. And I found out more recently from a source who signed a letter, statement, testimony to this, that Clinton was also threatened for looking into this by George H.W. Bush. And so, who, by the way, was a member of this group, organized to keep this secret. And so I think, you know, what I try to do very honestly in the time I have with figures like this, whether it's a senator or congressman or whoever, is to do an executive briefing, but then put together a package. Like if you go to my place in DC, you'll see the black books for President Obama and Trump and some of the past presidents sitting there because they're out of office. And that's been provided to them. But it's the tip of a big iceberg. And the subject, to be honest with you, Brian, is so complex and Byzantine that it takes a lot to get through all the noise to get to the sound. Because there's, I would say, for every bit of information that's out there, there are 10 parts of disinformation. And so that's a very difficult thing to sift through. And if you're new to this, which all these members of Congress are, you're at a huge disadvantage. So what I try to be is sort of a guide or a Sherpa through the wilderness for these folks who often are desperate to know what the truth is. But in the case of Trump, he was gaslit because they wanted to stand up to Space Force. They presented it as a threat. I know Pence, members of his close inner circle of friends are on my team, and they told me what he was briefed on and told, and they knew he was being gaslit. But that can lead to huge policy mistakes, up to and including targeting and destroying extraterrestrial assets. Now, this is an existential threat to world peace. So, and yet it isn't like there's some vast conspiracy of people. Most of the time, someone like President Reagan or Mr. Trump or whoever, they're just acting on the best intelligence they can get. And so I think it behooves the public, all of us, to try to gather the truth and put it in front of them. So that's what this archive does, actually. Now, one thing that's going to be added that I've already done, but it hasn't been transcribed, are what I call the intelligence assessments for each of the 13 categories of the archive, where I connect all the dots and do the overall assessment. Because information is not knowledge, and knowledge isn't wisdom. So what we're working on is what would be the knowledge and the wisdom, and connecting the dots from an intelligence point of view of how each case is connected, how these compartment operations have evolved, where they exist, where does the money come from. You can't get that from a document. You can get it from some of the top secret witness testimony, but what I tried to do is synthesize that intelligence. I kind of hold it in my head and then connect all these millions of dots into an assessment. And that is the hardest thing to do, frankly. And that's we're working on that right now. It is not in the archive yet because it was based on I didn't have time to write it all out, and I of course had been injured, so I did a presentation to a group of people beginning last summer before I was injured with some of the special forces guys, the Green Berets, and others supporting our effort. But then I did another event for a whole week. Those are being rewritten, and it's going to be astonishing what's in there, because it will, and they will provide hot links from my presentation to all the different, terabytes of data in this archive that'll connect those dots for people. And that's really what people are going to benefit most from, particularly if you're a lawmaker or someone in government.
Dr. Greer, who's blocking the further funding of this in Congress?
Well, unfortunately, when we spoke, you remember we had done our National Press Club event, and that day the Senate Intelligence Committee unanimously passed out of committee, unanimous is unusual, a motion to provide amnesty, safe harbor for whistleblowers and some other provisions. It went through and was passed by the Senate. However, what happened in December, you have to do reconciliation between the House and the Senate on any bill, right? And in the House, there were two, quite frankly, bad actors. Mike Turner, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, whose district includes Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and Mike Rogers of the House Armed Services, both blocked that. And they have also been active in keeping the House oversight from having a select committee with subpoena power. And that's a problem. Now, I had told my folks who are in law enforcement that we will know them by their deeds. In other words, when something like this comes out of the Senate, which I'd begun working with much earlier than with the House members, like Mr. Burchett and Ms. Luna and Moskowitz and others, they were a couple years ahead of the House. And I said, once this comes out of the Senate, because those members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and Armed Services, they have a lot more information that we've been providing, for 2 or 3 years, more like 3 years. So we knew that we'll see who stands up, because, the purse strings, as they say, is controlled by the House. They are the ones in charge of funding. And so ultimately, those provisions were ripped out of the National Defense Authorization Act in December, and subsequently they've been blocking the formation of this House Oversight Select Committee that would be staffed with investigators, would have subpoena power, and so forth. And to be honest with you, without subpoena power, you're really completely almost neutralizing any House hearing, because the most important whistleblowers that I have that are direct firsthand, I don't mean secondhand people like, Mr. Grush. I'm talking about direct firsthand folks who have worked on the craft, who've flown them, who know about the man-made ones, who know about the crash retrievals, have been part of those programs, on and on and on. They don't want to come forward unless they get subpoenaed. All right. And it's under some formal process like that, as opposed to just voluntarily coming forward. So you're losing 90+% of your intelligence sources that we have without a subpoena. And unfortunately, I just found out from meetings up at the House with Congressman Burchett and some others that, in fact, that has been stopped, and he was not hopeful that they would get those powers, which means it becomes even more important for the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive to be disseminated globally, and also for these other operations to get stood up. But unfortunately, these other operations would basically bypass the Congress and the White House because they would move quickly. Now, the first putting their toe in the water for the law enforcement end of this is extending this protection to witnesses, witness protection for whistleblowers on the UAP UFO issue. And people have asked me about that for years. If you go through the archive, you'll see that's a formal request made to President Clinton in, I think, 1994 or 5, like literally 30 years ago. So, and now we have it. So I tell people, this has been an ultra marathon for me. I started this effort when I was 34, and this month I turned 69. So it's been a journey.
Well, congratulations on that effort, and that's a big deal. I think you briefly made a reference to man-made UFOs earlier, and for people that maybe missed our first episode, they might be thinking, what the heck is that? Because I think that phrase maybe really cuts through to your thesis of what's out there. So could you explain that to someone who doesn't understand what that means?
I would say 70 to 80% of all UFO sightings are highly classified Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Lockheed Skunk Works. Now let's unpack that for a minute. We know, and we can prove, there's a whole section of the archive on crash retrievals. I think we're now up to 120 or 30 that we have documented. Many of them are illustrated. Many of the cases you'll see have named witnesses who were present at the retrieval. Those are in the archive. We released all of it. Now, we also know through Black Budget, the section of the archive on the Black Budget, trillions of dollars have gone into this. I mean, no less a figure than Donald Rumsfeld. We have the videotape of him saying the day before 9/11 that there are $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budget. Unaccounted for is a polite way of saying just flat out stolen. No auditors can find it. And so when you combine those two data points, retrieval of advanced extraterrestrial vehicles with that kind of clandestine and illegal funding in the trillions of dollars, you add one more element. And this is the most important element. The brain trust. I would say the physicists and the engineers that have the highest IQ I have ever met on Earth are working in underground bases or in these programs. They are absolutely brilliant. Often they're plucked out of high school or college. I mean, I will tell you right now, the most brilliant people in those fields are not writ large at MIT or Caltech or Harvard. They just aren't. I mean, academia is where we kind of dump mediocre bright people, not these kinds of people. I mean, no offense to anybody, but it's true.
Do you think that people, because I went to MIT and if I told my professors, these thoughts about anti-gravity, they would, look at me funny. Do you think At that point in time, those people are so brainwashed into the classical science that they couldn't even get their head around this? Do you actually have to bring people in earlier in their career?
Yes.
Is that one of the reasons?
Absolutely. By the time you get your master's or PhD, you're steeped in the orthodoxy and you're in that box, unless you're a true scientist. Now, let me define a true scientist. A true scientist is searching for the truth, and they will go where it leads them. And that's true whether the situation with what happened with COVID or with this or anything else. You're going to go to where the facts are. You're not going to be prejudiced with your preconceived beliefs. That is not a scientist. So a genuine scientist will look at the facts and will go where the facts are and is open to discovery. But I always tell people, look, I'm a medical doctor and emergency and trauma and all that. We're scientists second. We're humans first. And so humans have their foibles and the ego and the tendency to get blinders put up and have prejudices against things that you think just cannot be true. And that's true of journalists and politicians and all humans. So, and it's true of scientists. People think that scientists somehow aren't human because they're scientists. No, they have all the failings and frailties of humans, which we all are. And so we all have those frailties and failings. And so if you're a true scientist, it's a constant effort to do a check and balance on that and say, am I not looking at this correctly because of my preconceived biases? But most scientists are not quite that objective. And I think that's why many of the brilliant scientists that I have worked with and know, their files, some of them are in this archive, but their names are redacted unless they've approved the release. Now, just so you know, you'll see a lot of blacked out names and information. It's because if someone has said, we want you to have this information, but I don't want to have to be in the public spotlight or risk my family's life or whatever, that name is removed and their cell number or their social security, or if they have a DD-214, their discharge form from the military, those are all scrubbed. It's taken us a year to scrub that, but you'll see what they said. You'll see my correspondence with them. You'll see what I wrote, what they wrote back. Now, it would take you years to get through all this, but it's an enormous amount of information, and we've released all of it.
Wow, that's a huge move that you put that out there. And so, just to conclude, that man-made UFO technology was derived from the technology we learned from the aliens, and since we've now mastered that, you're saying 70-80% of what we see is actually that man-made UFO.
Sure, and when I talked to the pilot, David Fravor, about his chasing that object off the coast of California that's been all in the media, we immediately knew it was a Lockheed object. It was not, and she couldn't believe it. He says, we don't have anything like that. I said, sir, with all due respect, you were read into jet engines, maybe rockets. You are not. These are deep black projects that have been going on since the 40s. And I always tell people an astonishing date. October 1954 is the date that we mastered gravity control. We had craft that were experimental, that were kind of wobbly. You look at some of the old High 8 movies and you see the craft, they look like a falling leaf. Those were ours that were not stable. The gyro, the stability of the system wasn't stable. And I can look at a videotape from the 40s, 50s, and say, that's one of ours, that they had not stabilized the guidance system on it. But I have a man who was the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs, the largest defense lab in the world, there in DC, and his name was Rick Foch. He's passed away. He was in the vault and saw the documents where we had mastered and finally controlled gravity control, it was called, October 1954. So remember, if you look at the testimony and the evidence we have from Brad Sorensen about what was called the ARV, the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, all that material is in the archive. That's a whole section. And that was built in the late 50s, early 60s, and had scorch marks on it. It was on an air show at Norton Air Force Base. And this whole account is in there, including excellent artist renderings of this object and schematics and a blueprint of what it was in the interior. And that was man-made. And it had moved all through the solar system. And this was before my uncle, who helped work on the lunar module, landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong. He was Northrop Grumman his whole career. Put that first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. This would have been in the late 50s, early 60s. So there's a whole history to unpack, aerospace history, that James Goodall and others have now acknowledged and gotten information from Ben Rich, the head of the Skunk Works, that we had these objects. So if you have them and they're used in a deceptive operation, everyone's going to go, oh, that's an alien craft. Well, it isn't. And same thing with all of the abductions. Those have been man-made, staged events for their, quote, psychological warfare value. How do we know this? We have direct testimony from Air Force intelligence. We have documents. We have an entire dossier from Martin Cannon, who documented this in the 80s. And we have Jacques Vallée, Dr. Jacques Vallée, admitting in a 1992 entry in a book that he wrote that he had a 1985 document that is an official document of the CIA. I know two other people who have it, where it says they were committing alien abductions using man-made UFOs with stagecraft, where they use creatures that look alien, but they're not. It's robotics or humans made up to look like an ET in Brazil and Argentina. And it says, quote, for their psychological warfare value. Now, go back 30 years to 1953, and I have a document from the director of the CIA that's in the archive that says, and it was a psychological warfare board meeting, and it was saying the psychological warfare value of the UFO issue. Excuse me, I got a thing in my throat. Should be exploited. Well, that was in 53, a year before they knew they were going to be close to getting these operational man-made UFOs. And so they started a whole program of deception and gaslighting so that people would know, is it real or is it Memorex, like the old commercial for the tapes? You know, is it ours? Is it theirs? And this has obfuscated the UFO research on this issue, but it's also created a mythology around the subject that supports a false narrative, which Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, warned Carol Rosin, who's on our team, on his deathbed, that we would stage a threat from outer space to try to create a global unification around a military threat rather than peace. And that was concocted way back in the 50s. He told her that in 1974, 50 years ago.
Yeah, I distinctly remember from our last conversation you saying that if it ever comes about that we are being invaded globally by an alien force, this is a concoction. And it's probably used to actually go ahead and do something against the population. Can you go a little deeper on explaining that to people, just so maybe they can try to be aware of that? And I guess that's playing on all the seeds that they've planted over the past decades that this even is.
I mean, most of the UFO subculture and movies in Hollywood are based on real events that have been staged by these psychological warfare operations. And now, there is an exception to what you said. In the event of a global catastrophe, there would be an extraterrestrial intervention. That would be ET. Or if, and this is what we're afraid of, if we continue to develop these technologies where we are a threat to other planets or serious threat to ET assets, at some point, out of self-defense, they will have to shut those operations down. The ETs will. And I know a man who spent quite a bit of time in S4, the very sensitive area underground at Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51, where they track communications, that this was a huge problem. that the ETs were less than amused that we had taken their technologies and flipped it on them, and were using them in weapon systems against them. And so that largesse and patience probably has a limit. And I'm not trying to scare people, but I think that any organization, and this is a interplanetary organization out there dealing with this, it's not just cowboys and Indians out in space. And there's a leash. We can only go down, pull that leash too far, and it's going to snap back. So I warned about that last summer, because we've gotten increasing intelligence that we humans are going too far with the exploitation of these technologies and weaponizing them and turning them against the ETs. So this is something that neither the president nor the Congress has any control over. And that is dangerous. That is the greatest existential threat, more than China, more than Iran, more than Russia, more than Hamas, more than any of them. And people are not aware of it, and they need to be made aware of it. Now, back to what you mentioned, I know from witnesses, and we had, some have passed away, by the way. There is a 1997 gathering we did for Congress, 27 years ago. One of the men who is going to testify in this off-site meeting for members of Congress in Washington was taken from the hotel where we were staying by his colleagues, begging him not to tell the public what I'm about to tell you. And he had been on an interagency committee back in the early 70s. And they had in place all the mechanisms to hit a button and the skies would be filled with these man-made UFOs made to look like an alien invasion. And he said those systems had been in place well before he was there, indicating at least in the 60s, 1960s. So I would say for the better part of 60 years, there have been operational systems where they could stage such an attack. And I believe there have been limited staged events like that already. For example, you hear about these, an event where there were some villagers and people killed in South America by a UFO, where they targeted it and it blew up the whole village. Same thing in Africa. Those were us doing that for its psychological warfare value. Now, you have to understand when you're dealing with sociopaths and psychopaths, I mean, think of, Hitler's crazy scientists on steroids having technologies thousands of years more advanced. And then you begin to realize how dangerous this organization is, because having trillions of dollars and some of the brightest minds I've ever met and the actual materiel, retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles, you're going to have some amazing breakthroughs. I would say the breakthroughs like what Raytheon has, that our witness Stephen Digna, and you'll see his testimony in there, saw out at a military base in California. Those are so advanced, Brian, that they're virtually indistinguishable from an actual ET craft, up to and including AI, living bio nanotechnology, really advanced stuff. So we go from a clunky ARV from the late 50s, 1960s, that's in the archive, to the testimony in 2000 by Stephen Digna, where this craft is almost like a bio nanotechnology. But it was Raytheon. It was Raytheon's ship. And so I know this sounds like science fiction to people, and I apologize. I will say, in 1991, I had a CIA guy approach me, and he said, because I had already uncovered the truth about most of this 30 some years ago, and I'm just releasing things as we can prove it, right? But he said, if you tell the truth, you'll be discredited, because the fiction we're telling the public is much more believable than the truth. And that sat with me. And he was correct. This was an old hand who'd been in these operations for decades, and he was dying, he had cancer. And he just said, look, man, he's also the one who said, A, you need to have a dead man trigger, get your stuff, and B, you need to be known by enough people that if you're not the tree that falls in the wood that nobody hears. So that's why I went on Larry King Live and all those shows. It's a private medical doctor. You have to understand, I started out on this path thinking that if I put this stuff together and got it to the president, he'd take the ball and run with it, right? Now, that was back in the first year of Clinton's administration. And I was naive and a very young doctor. I had no idea that the depth of this covert world, or even how it worked, really, but it's been unpacked over time. And now I would say I have a very clear grasp of it, certainly more than anyone in the U.S. government.
And I'm thinking of the movie Independence Day. It always comes to my head.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It seems like the perfect Hollywood rendition of what they might want to stage. And you've got all these craft that show up. Again, we first naively think that they're good, or at least people do. And then they basically just try to kill everybody. And you're forced to react and to try to save the world. What would be the point of the cabal trying to get that in everyone's head? Is it so we would attack back? Is it so we would cover up what they're doing? What would be the ultimate goal of staging something like that?
Well, really, think about it. Propaganda and psychological warfare, you can't get the public to expend blood or treasure in a war or an effort without first indoctrinating them. And that is true of every war and of every conflict. So the propaganda, they knew they would need to put out there this specter of a threat from outer space. This is what Werner von Braun on his deathbed in 1974 warned about. And he knew that was a false narrative. But that's how you unite the world around a transnational global power. Because ultimately this is about power and control. Just think of that. And the money behind it is just representative of power. So, for example, even the technologies that are secret, why don't we have free energy? I have this chairman of a Fortune 50 corporation who has contacted me, who wants to come forward. And as soon as he did, this was before we got this protection put in place last year, he approached me. Someone approached him and basically said, we're going to kill your entire family, including your children and grandchildren. But this is a chairman, very well. If I used his name, people would know this. It's a household name in America and around the world, this corporation. But he has the schematics and the plans. He says, he's old. He's getting up there in years. And he said, the whole world for decades could have had, quote unquote, free energy. Now that means no poverty and no pollution. And he knows whereof he speaks. They made these devices, this corporation, in a compartmented black operation. And he has the designs. He has the documents. He wants to hand them over, but he's scared to death. So, and he should be. He should be. That's why I'm trying to set up these protective measures. But one thing he regrets, and he used the word regret, is that he's been part of this, and he looks at the world around him and the world he's leaving to his grandchildren. And I have 12 grandchildren. And I think, my God, we have got to fix this mess. And it's fixable. The good news for everyone, amid all this sort of spooky stuff, is that we already have all the solutions. The solution to pollution, poverty, we would have a paradise here. But they want the paradise to be under their control and based on conflict and war. And they want to unite the people, not in peace. They want to unite the people in war. And that is why people like President Trump or Reagan get played. It's why there's so much. You greenlight a movie like Independence Day instantly and spend $150 million or whatever making it because it's part of the machine. And, Rage Against the Machine. But you have this machine that wants to do that. But a lot of these people who come forward, I'll tell you, they get up there in years and they're going to meet their maker and they go, God, what is my legacy I'm leaving? And I know that this chairman of this major Fortune 50 corporation feels this way. And so what we need, if we can get that dam to break, if enough people like him can be protected and feel safe to come forward. That is very important. And that's why I'm making an appeal on your show. People like that. If you're ever going to step forward before you meet your maker, it's going to be now, and it needs to happen. And at least now we have a sincere group of highly skilled former special forces people who are operating under law enforcement and an agency I can't mention that can extend protection.
Now, I'll ask this question. If they could provide free energy for everyone in the world, why wouldn't they do that, Stephen? It seems like it seems like such a no-brainer. I mean, you're saying that would mean that we wouldn't rely on our governments, and that way they couldn't divide us, and that they couldn't control us.
Well, because there are multiple layers of an agenda here. Some of it's very prosaic. I mean, when you talk about bringing something out that would run your house and car with zero energy costs, and it wouldn't be that expensive to manufacture. These are very high voltage VHV electromagnetic circuits that operate at certain frequencies, cycles per second. And they can hit that sweet spot where they tap into the baseline 0 point of quantum vacuum energy that's around us, what Nikola Tesla called the infinite energy field. Well, what does that mean? Well, that coming out means the end of all public utilities. How many trillions of dollars are in public utilities and pension funds? All surface roads go away when you get the anti-grav. You don't need construction of roads. All oil, gas, coal, solar, wind, nuclear power, Tesla cars with these big lithium-ion battery packs, they all go the way of the Royal Typewriter or hearse and buggies. I mean, this is the biggest industrial revolution in the history of humanity. But there are a lot of stakeholders. Think of this. We're talking more than $1,000 trillion in assets would become redundant and unnecessary. Geopolitically would change the face of the earth. You know, let me translate for people what our national security interests are in the Middle East. Oil, one word. And if there wasn't oil there and it's supplying a huge amount of our needs, there would be no national security interests there. And the whole conflict is because we've had to do things to maintain that supply of oil, which have enraged the local cultures in those parts of the world. So one error begets another, begets another, begets another. And now look at where we are. You know, some people think we're on the brink of World War III. Others believe we're on the brink of biosphere collapse and the oceans dying. All of this is man-made. What I'm saying is that the solution for all of that exists, but some people view the cure worse than the disease. In other words, they fear that much change happening. And the way technology proliferates and promulgates now, and with the internet, if you come out with one of these systems, the whole world, we would do it open source. I proposed a fund that nobody's funded yet to do an open source engineering project to develop these and just put them out. Now, here's a little tip. If anyone's a scientist, in this archive are the Bedini-Sajaki files. What is that? Some years ago, I met with John Bedini and connected to him via some friends and Lieutenant Colonel Bearden, Tom Bearden. And Bedini, when he was being recruited by a CIA officer named Sajaki, was given access to this sounds like right out of a movie. It was an old schoolhouse that had been repurposed as a storage facility out in the upper Midwest in a remote area for confiscated energy devices and technologies and their patents that had been confiscated illegally with a national security order. And this CIA officer, Sajaki, let John Bedini take a copier, Xerox copier in there for 24 hours to copy anything he wanted in exchange for trying to recruit Bedini into his covert program. Because John Bedini was a genius with this electromagnetic materials and engineering. And he did. But Bedini decided not to go with this compartmented operation that Sajaki had. And in the early 90s, Sajaki did approach me at one point and he's since passed away. Well, so Jakey was furious, and some people roughed up John Bedini over this because he didn't join them. And they don't know he kept a copy of those files. Those have been digitized. Those are now in the archive. So I got a DVD with all these documents and patents on it. We have now decoded it. It was under an encrypted system, and that's in the archive. And so anyone who is, I'm not a physicist or a bench person who builds electromagnetic systems. That whole file is in there under the science and technology section of the archive. So you sink your teeth into that if you're an inventor.
It's exciting. You mentioned the moon landing. Did we land on the moon? Because there's some people who think we didn't.
Well, we did. We just weren't told what happened. Okay, so it's more complicated than that. If you look at the disclosure witness, his name is Wolf. And Carl Wolf was at a national security agency where he was actually at an Air Force base, Langley Air Force Base. But there was an NSA compartment in operation there in '68 when we were doing the first digital imaging of mapping the moon before the landing in '69. And if you read his whole testimony, which we have put in the archive, I remember in my books and documentaries, you see little clips. In the archive is a whole huge interview, right? A lot more material. Of course, it takes a lot of time to go through it. It's all in there for free for anyone to see. Now, what he said was he was called in to repair something, got cleared into this top secret compartmented area at this Air Force base, went in, and there was a man there who showed him these pictures of objects on the moon. And some were ancient structures, some were new. Now, remember, this is 1968. We didn't land until '69. So he says in this interview, it scared the hell out of him. He knew he wasn't supposed to be seen. Excuse me, seeing this. But he looked anyway, and it stuck in his mind that this is amazing because not only were there obelisks and old structures in a certain area of the moon, but there are these newer, look like newer buildings. So when we landed on the moon, these covert programs knew it was likely that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and these guys might see something. And so they had it ready that when we landed, around the crater above where we landed on the Sea of Tranquility. And remember, my uncle worked on the lunar module. He was Grumman, Northrop Grumman, his whole career. The crater was crowded with UFOs watching. And there is footage of that. But in order for it not to be in there, they spliced in some pre-prepared footage that everybody thought that Stanley Kubrick made, which isn't true. I mean, I know Vivian Kubrick, his daughter, and we laugh about this. But it was done because they didn't want to risk that being seen with the whole world watching this first lunar landing. And they knew there was a fair chance that something might come into view. And so they had some alternative film already pre-prepared and shot, fake, that they could splice in because all the signals coming from the moon were going through Australia and a delay. And so that's what happened. So we went to the moon, but the whole drama of what happened was never shown. Now, Buzz Aldrin's sister has told me very directly that everything I've shared just now is true, but that it's not her job to out him. And of course, Neil Armstrong, through a friend of his, told us the same story, but he didn't want to come forward. When I invited him to these briefings for members of Congress back in '97, he said, it's been made clear to him, Neil Armstrong was told, we will kill you, your wife, your children, and your grandchildren if you ever speak of that. So that sounds like something out of a dark movie. It is the truth and the whole truth. And so that's why a lot of these men and women, never come forward because you're dealing with a bunch of thugs. I mean, let's just bottom line this. These are not people who care about the law or the Constitution. They want to get their way, and they will use deadly force when needed, or intimidation, or set you up in criminal activity. There's a million different ways. I recently had a whistleblower who had been on a retrieval team not many years ago, like 2009. He was retrieving both man-made triangular UFOs made by Northrop and Raytheon, and on one occasion, an ET craft. He was so disgusted with what they were doing, he tried to get out of that program. When he came forward to give me all this information, his account, by the way, is in the archive, but his name's removed. Some thugs showed up at his house in a black van, and they said, don't go any further discussing this. Because we were going to bring him to Washington to go through the Aero skiff and the Senate intelligence briefing, and then our event in June last year. And they said, look at your computer and your phone. And they had put child pornography all over. They had invaded his system. They said, you take one more step forward, you're going to be in prison for the rest of your natural life. And he has 2 young boys. And they literally set him up for child pornography. So when people say they don't have these capabilities, I assure you they do. I deal with this every month, some atrocity like this. And this is why now, if I hand off someone to this special access project who wants to come forward, and someone pulls a stunt like that, they're going to be watching electronically, and they're going to track them, and they're going to get arrested. So that team will have the power to open a criminal proceeding, an investigation against somebody who threatens one of these witnesses like that. But up until now, Brian, I haven't had that ability. I mean, it's the goodwill of people patriotically coming forward to tell the truth to humanity, and that they have come forward in the numbers they have is sort of a miracle that I've been able to convince them. But now we have what many people have asked for. We need this executive protection.
That's a major breakthrough. And I remember from our last conversation, you telling me that this group can get pretty nasty. They can be a bunch of thugs, and they'll use deadly force to protect their secrets in a heartbeat.
Oh, absolutely. And the technology is. I have an FBI person who said, who's on my team, they have 150 substances that can brush up against you and kill you or give you a disease. So, and she's not part of that, but she's been read into it. And this is one of the problems, the lack of oversight by good people and people on the side of the law. When you start looking at what mischief people who have had 70, 80 years and trillions of dollars, and some of the brightest minds in the world in the last 80 years, to reverse engineer and study these technologies, right? And they're off the reservation doing whatever they damn well wish, and they're doing it globally. It's not just the United States. And as I mentioned, Dr. Valet admitted he had this document where we were victimizing, it said, peasants in Brazil and Argentina, abducting them, making it look alien. So these sort of atrocious behaviors are a global problem, and yet no international or national government has done anything to be a watchdog and get it under control. And we're trying to do what we can to get that word out.
Dr. Greer, what do you think of Elon Musk? He's clearly involved, obviously, in SpaceX and putting these vehicles up in orbit. He's clearly involved in Starlink, beaming down and trying to give internet access to people in different areas on the planet. And he's come out and said, I have seen no evidence of aliens, and if anyone would see it, it would be me. And I'll let you know if I do see it. What do you make of him and those statements?
I think he's saying what he has to say to stay alive and to prosper. Let me tell you, getting on the side of disclosing this information will not help you raise money for a battery car that's plugged into the coal-fired power grid. It's not going to help you get government money to put a rocket from 1940s up into space, because that's what they are. We haven't needed rockets since 1954. So I think he's saying what he needs to say to be where he is. Now, whether or not he's actually been read in and on any of this information, officially or unofficially, I can't say. But anyone who says there's no evidence for this, now I would just say, go to the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. It's free. Every bit of evidence you could ever ask for is in there, from government documents to landing traces. Hell, we have the original, not a copy, the original of the FAA radar case tracking the Japan Airlines 747 Heavy over Alaska, and this massive thing the size of a battleship zipping around that was an actual ET craft. And the guy who was the head investigator for the FAA, when he retired, took the original radar tracings and data and gave them to us. And that's in the archive. So, I mean, these are ironclad cases. So anyone who says they've never seen any evidence of this, now you can hand them that URL for the archive and say, look at this. And if they still say that, they're a liar and a damn liar. Now, people who haven't looked into it, you can't blame them for not knowing. People who don't know. But, I'm sort of with Senator Patrick Daniel Moynihan, who said everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own set of facts. So the archive is filled with facts and cases and firsthand witness testimony and government documents and landing evidence and radar tapes. So there it is. Now, you can have an opinion even if you want to take a blind eye and not look at it. But if you are willfully blind and make a statement like Mr. Musk did, then no one should take his opinion seriously. Just like Tyson, Neil deGrasse Tyson and others who have made similar statements. You either don't know what you're talking about, or you're a paid lackey carrying the water of people who want you to say the correct things so you can be famous and rich. Now, Carl Sagan was that kind of character. Three members of my team knew him very well. And Carl Sagan was basically, they'd found some improprieties in his academic work, and these thugs in the intelligence community threatened him and said, you'll be a janitor at Cornell instead of a professor, unless you tell the public what we want you to on this issue. So he became rich and famous telling people the UFOs didn't exist, there were no aliens. He had his whole cosmos series and fame. But his best man at his wedding is on my team and has told us that he was turned for fame and money and was blackmailed because they had some dirt on something he did that was improper, I think, during his PhD thesis. So those are the games that are played all the time. And so you only have to ask the question, the person is either ignorant of the facts or they are deliberately lying because they have to, or they've been induced to, either through bribery or blackmail. And remember, I've had both thrown at me. I've had blackmail attempts, and not many people walk away from $2 billion in 1992. And it was a serious offer from General Stubblebine, the head of Army Intelligence. And but most people are going to take that golden ring and swing on it. And I wasn't interested because that's never been what I cared about. Literally, when I say we put $20 million into putting this material together over 34 years, and everything I've done has been pro bono. We've never been paid to do a briefing in Congress. All of that, all the disclosure work has been for free. And we have programs that help raise money, and we crowdfund things. But, it's been a labor of love. But most people, when they're either threatened, it's a carrot and a stick at the same time. And I can tell you that this is very likely, I don't know, I'm speculating, but having known the details of people like Mr. Sagan and others, I know how they turn people and capture people. So he either doesn't know what he's talking about, and I would suggest that if he hears this, go look at the archive, or he's saying what he has to say to stay where he is.
Dr. Greer, what role does the media play in all of this, potentially disinformation campaign? We actually just launched our documentary film about 10 days ago It's almost at
Right.
about 5 million views, and it's called "We Will Not Be Silenced," and it talks about how we were being censored by our digital media platforms in
Right.
2020 when we started to have conversations about COVID, and we were probably some of the earliest to be censored because we're talking
Right.
March 20, April 20, May 20. And the
Mhm.
movie really goes deep into it. It's got some never seen before recorded conversations with senior YouTube executives trying to figure out how to censor me when it's clear that they're being told by someone else what to do. And it's very interesting. But again, to this day, I have been deplatformed from YouTube and obviously shadow banned from other platforms. When you look at the media, mainstream and the digital media, what do you see happening there, and how can we fight back against it?
Well, you're 100% right. I've had the same thing happen, and it is corruption. So you have these covert programs who have very powerful tentacles into the media. And in fact, we have an entire file on the media in the archive proving media corruption. And the reason this is important, many people have asked me, how has this been kept secret? I said, because of the collusion by a corrupted media. There's no way this could be kept secret with the explosive evidence we've been putting out for 30 years, except the media is at a very high level of its funding and organization corrupted by these same exact interests. And that is a fact. And so a little anecdotal story. Back in the early mid 90s, I was in New York City with some of the New York 100, and the UN Secretary General's wife was there, and some of the Rockefellers and whatnot. And a guy named Bob Schwartz, who was on the board of AOL Time Life, and then it became AOL Time Warner, was there. And he was very good friends with Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes and whatnot. And he told me a very interesting story. He said Mike Wallace had discovered this issue and wanted to do a show on it, and he was slapped down and was denied. He couldn't do it. And he thought he was the premier investigative reporter for 60 Minutes, CBS. But this is the third rail. This you get electrocuted with. And Mike Wallace actually went into a deep depression over this. But Bob Schwartz told me, he said, basically, he said, Dr. Greer, we, the media, are scribes, I'm quoting, taking dictation from the right hand of the king, that we're basically been relegated to only reporting what we're allowed to report. And anyone who thinks that there is a true free media. Now, small media, they don't care about. But when it rises to the level of a CNN or a Fox or YouTube or any of these, if it's something that they do not want out, they can pull those levers and they can keep it from being really moving to the top. And this is what I have seen for 30 years. I'm living proof of what your thesis of your documentary is. Because to have look at the National Press Club event, 2001, 23 years. That's 23 years. It was covered, and I was told by people in the media that reached about 1 billion viewers. And they said, take it down. They had people contact them. And I have a document from the CIA that brags about how they had people embedded in all the world's media to change stories, kill stories, alter stories. That's in the archive. It's an uncontested 1992 CIA document, notwithstanding the fact it's by law illegal for the CIA to operate in domestically at all. But that is in the archive. So I tell people, don't take my word for it. The proof is in this archive. But what you're saying in your documentary, 100% true. And just take whatever they did with the old legacy media and extrapolate it to the tech sector. Same thing, no difference.
Yeah, there's this interesting point in the movie where on April 6, 2020, we had the second largest YouTube live stream in the world. And 30 minutes later, they delete the video and ban it from their platform. First time in 9 years of broadcasting that had ever happened to me. Of course, we were talking about COVID. Now, right after that, then Dropbox took me down, LinkedIn, PayPal suspended my account. And, I'm thinking to myself, this all seems to be acting in concert, But if you
Sure.
voice that, you're considered this crazy conspiracy theorist and kind of gaslit as a weirdo. And
Right.
it's funny because I was at the Myrtle Beach Film Festival where we won Best International Documentary, and there's a guy named Mike Benz there who was on Tucker Carlson recently, and he's writing a book called Weapons of Mass Deletion. He's been studying the kind of military, government, and corporate censorship complex over the last 100 years, and he was kind of laughing throughout the movie. And I was looking at him thinking, you know, I really care what he thinks of this movie. And afterwards, he said, Brian, he said, I knew what was happening behind the scenes at every point that you were getting censored by YouTube. And there's a point where YouTube doesn't even know the details of the censorship. They actually contradict themselves. And he said, that's because, Brian, they were being told what to do by a government agency. And this has been going on for 100 years. And no American corporation operates on a global scale without the protection of the government, which means they owe them the censorship they demand. And it's really refreshing to hear you say this, Dr. Greer, because like you said, there's no way you could keep any of this a secret without the media being complicit.
And remember, let's connect a dot. In the archive is a 1950 Canadian top secret document that states that, number one, the flying saucers, they called them back then, are real, that a concerted team headed up by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who headed up the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb, is studying them, and their modus operandi, I'm quoting, meaning their propulsion and energy system, and that the whole matter is of tremendous significance and is more secret than the development of the hydrogen bomb. This is in black and white. It's an officially released top secret Canadian document. Now, what in the world would be more sensitive than the development of the ultimate doomsday weapon, a hydrogen bomb, a thermonuclear bomb? It's this. And so, given that that's the case, imagine what measures have been taken to infiltrate and corrupt corporate media and what have you. And that's what we're up against. When I say that this issue about the extraterrestrial vehicles, the presence of the ETs, which are non-hostile, the technologies we figured out, that is the biggest secret in the history of the known recorded history of Earth, not just the United States. And the organization keeping it secret is global. It is not just US. And so, because look at it, I mean, the whole petrodollar banking system, oil, all of that is underpinned by the energy system that runs everything you and I are using, including this conversation. So if you, what I often do with a senator or a member of Congress, I'll say, you see that thing moving that the Pentagon has admitted was our Navy jet, Fravor and his guys filming? There's no propulsion system. There's no rocket. There's no heat signature. They've admitted there's no jets. There's no nuclear power plant because those are hot as hell. And there's no thermal image. I said, how is it moving? Up and down and at huge speeds and making turns. It's an electromagnetic field propulsion. We figured out how they work. When that comes out, it's the end of oil and the petrodollar, on and on and on. I said, so let's demystify this. This is much less about little green men and little gray men and aliens than it is about raw geopolitical power and money. Full stop. It's a technology story. It's a science story. But it's the secrecy has reached the point that it's killing the earth. I mean, you have 3 billion people on the earth, but don't even have the means to cook their food. So they're cutting down rainforests. So how do you fix this problem? You're not going to fix it with solar panels or windmills. I have the largest, I'm looking at it, the largest legally allowed solar panel, solar farm allowed by law in Virginia, right here on my farm near Thomas Jefferson's house. And guess what? When our power goes out, it won't run bumpkiss. You can't heat or cool this house with that system. It's not big enough. And that's the largest you're going to legally make, and it costs $100,000. So this is not a solution for poor people who don't even have the means to cook their food. So these technologies would fix all those problems, but they would also terminate $1,000 to $2,000 trillion worth of corporate assets and commodities. So this is the conundrum we're in. If this information had come out 100 years ago, we'd be okay. We waited too long. Now it's either got to, it's going to be hard either way, man. I mean, there's no easy way to do this unless you're looking at an extinction level event where you crash the whole system and pull it back out of the ashes like Phoenix, right? So this is why the dithering in Congress, and I will tell you this, the people in the special forces and covert world that are on our side of this are, I'm using the term and I'm quoting, fed up. And so that's dangerous though, because we're talking about a catastrophic disclosure. And so I think we need to thread this needle very carefully. I'm trying to, as best I can, as one man with my friends, and thank God I have the most wonderful wife and support. But you know, we've been married 45 years, but it's been quite a journey. And the other thing, I mean, these people laugh at this. These covert guys all go, "This is what most people laugh at. That's the most important," and that's what we're doing with the CE5 contact. So, by the way, anyone who wants to come in Temecula, July 26, 27, 28, we're going to have 500 people out under the stars setting up systems to vector in these UFOs and see what happens. But it's a whole training program. And if you can't come, you can do it online, do a webinar, and drop that link. The reason that's important, we haven't talked about this. What we're not talking about is out there. How do they view this? You know, we're on this planet, little blue planet, beautiful, and we're ruining it. And we're the only response these civilizations have gotten from humans have been down the barrel of a directional energy weapon or something, right? That knocks them out of the sky and we kill them. Who's taking care of the relationship? Who's taking care of the diplomacy? These are intelligent, living beings with civilizations that are very advanced. So what we're doing with this CE5 contact, even though it's ridiculed a great deal, I don't care. I'm going to call it everything, is to be the frontline human diplomatic corps, as it were, to reach out to these civilizations. Because Tony Blinken isn't, the United Nations isn't, the Foreign Ministry of the United Kingdom isn't, Foreign Office, who? So we have started this grassroots program to do that. And by the way, the success of that program by having 4 ET craft that came in Florida in 1992 started the Disclosure Project. That's why the intelligence community reached out to me. That was the genesis, this Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. The whole Disclosure Project started out of that because General Stubblebine and some of his guys took me to a hotel room and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, "Well, we've uncovered the Rosetta Stone of making ET contact. And it has to do with remote viewing and all these controversial concepts." And he says, "Yeah, but you don't have the right to do that." I said, "Yes, I do." And we did mano a mano for a while. And he had a CIA and an NSA guy there. Now, this was in 92. So, but when that event happened, it ended up on the front page of the Pensacola paper. And there was a group of us on the beach doing these CE5 contact protocols, and 4 popped in, materialized right there in the sky. Now, the cameras were lousy, but you can hear this one guy from Louisiana going, "Holy damn hot shit." It's hilarious. But it was fun. And so we're going to be doing that in next month in Temecula, California, out in the countryside outside this town. And it's going to be great fun.
And these extraterrestrials are nonviolent. You said that earlier. Can you go a little deeper on that?
Look, I have led a team for 34 years making this kind of contact. We've never been harmed. We've never been threatened. The only bad things that have happened have been at the hands of other humans. I don't see any evidence that they are hostile. Now, I do see a great deal of evidence that they're fed up with our hostility, right? That's different. That the fact that they're fed up with us is understandable. I mean, look what they've seen us do since 1940s to the planet. And remember, we have documented 120 plus downings of ET craft, but there have probably been thousands. So however many we have continuously been aggressive and violent towards them. So I would tell people you should flip this around the other way. And the fact that they have that kind of technology and have not kicked back and kicked back hard is a testimony to almost a Gandhi-like or Christ-like level of peacefulness, because we certainly would not have behaved that way. We would not have pulled our punches, given what I know we have done to them. And so, and there's also been this paucity or complete absence of humans reaching out to them. And this is the mistake Eisenhower realized. He wanted to pivot away from a military approach to a peaceful approach. And that's when he got shoved aside. And that's why no president since the early Eisenhower years and Truman have had any operational control over these projects. Because this group that is running this wants it to keep it on a war footing. They want to keep the technology secret, and they want to control the masses with the false narrative of an alien threat. Those are the three big agendas.
Oh. Last question I want to ask you, Dr. Greer, is your thoughts on this emergence of artificial intelligence and people predicting we could have this kind of AGI or human level intelligence, within a couple of years. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on that, even projecting this out another 5 years or 10 years. I mean, if this happens to maybe get a hold of this technology, what might that do that might no longer be in the humans' hands? And then I'm curious what the extraterrestrials might think of that. I don't know if you've even had time to game plan that out, but just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, we have talked about this a lot. And I've been on some meetings with some of the top AI people in the world discussing this. But the ultimate AI, ETs already have. And that's not what they're working on now on Earth. The ultimate AI is the consciousness field interfacing with very refined electromagnetic systems. And I defined this in 1991 as technology-assisted consciousness and consciousness-assisted technology, where the real singularity that they talk about is the non-local entangled field of consciousness. And right now, that's off the radar of AI, but that's how ETs operate. All of their systems are conscious interface systems where your thought, you think to something. We're not talking wires at the speed of light, because you can't go interstellar at the speed of light. It's too slow. You have to communicate at the speed of thought through the quantum entangled universe. Now, the AI that you're talking about is advanced. I'm not dismissing it, but like all technology, it's not the technology itself. It's the hands that wield it. In other words, this is why Einstein was so upset up until his death, that he contributed to the development of these doomsday weapons. So the question is, science in itself is neutral, but what do men do with it? And so I think what we have to do ethically, morally, is look at all of these systems, because they can be weaponized, they can be used for trouble in the wrong hands. So how do you put governance in place, or some kind of a built-in kill switch or something, so that in the wrong hands, AI isn't an existential threat to a whole society? That's what has to be discussed and looked at, because it isn't just what's technically feasible. Not everything, yes, you can create hydrogen bombs and blow up a whole city with one bomb, but should you? So what should be done, and under what auspices, and under what ethical consideration? So yeah, technically, yeah, we'll be there, and it's the same thing. This is going to sound far-fetched, but I'm working with a group of people currently very high up in operations dealing with the ET issue on the illegal black end of the human programs, and they have been able to crack the code of using what they call P3 operators, people with these advanced consciousness capabilities, to hack into ET guidance systems and move them over into range and kill them. It's sort of like a remote hijacking, like you would break into, but strange stuff. And the guy who worked with these P3 operators is on my team. And he sometimes will break into tears with the horrible things he's seen happen. And so I think that he knows that needs to get put on a leash. That it's an amazing, it's like the CE5 contact, but turned into a weapon system, right? With an electromagnetic interface, though, because they studied that from the ET craft. So I know a lot of people are hearing this thing. This is science fiction, but remember, at first, I mean, the science fiction sort of comes out ahead of the facts sometimes. But if you think about what is needed for interstellar travel and communication, and there's a covert group of folks studying that for 80 years, trillions of dollars in black money, and brilliant people, you're letting these sort of, it's like Dr. Strangelove, you know, a bunch of whacked out crazy people that nobody's watching have this kind of technology. It is dangerous. And he knows that. That's why he and his people want to defect and come forward. But they don't want to have it be ineffective. They know about the media cartel blockage on this information. And they also know that their children and families are at risk. So, you know, we're on the horns of a dilemma here. I mean, I'm just going to kind of giving you a little peek in what I deal with day in and day out. I have to say it's been very stressful. But anyway, nobody asked me to do it. I did it.
Doctor, how can people access the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive? And is that same website where they can also contribute to the crowdfunding campaign? What are the details to jump on there?
Yeah, if you go to DPI archiveproject.com, that's the crowdfunding, and it'll take you also to the actual archive. And you can just go to drstevengreer.com if you want to find out about that, and also this event we're doing out in California, which actually, if you can't be there in person, I think they're out of 500 places. I think there are only 30 left, but I wish you could come. You'd have a great time.
I saw some ads for it on your site. It looked pretty cool.
It's going to be fun. So that's how people can do that. And the archive itself is DPIarchive.com. And DPIarchive.com will take you directly. Now, you do have to register. What happened is that we had to put in an authentication where you put your email in. You can make up one. But the reason for that is that when we launched this, we had tens of thousands of bots attack the site. Literally. No one has seen anything like it. The developers were going, what is this? And I'd warned them it would happen. But yeah, we went under immediate attack by thousands of bots. So
yeah, same thing happened to us when we published our episodes back in 2020.
Oh, I'm sure.
And when they took the media off YouTube, we put it on our website and it got attacked as well. So I understand why you're doing that. Because I got to the login page and I was like, oh, that's kind of a pain. Now it makes sense why you did that. Dr. Greer, it's a huge deal that you were able to put this online, and it's a huge, I mean, that's a massive accomplishment. And the fact that people can literally go and look through that data and peruse it, and it's all there, or at least so much of it is there, that's a huge step. So congratulations for that. And as usual, I find it really fascinating talking to you. People really seem to enjoy your perspective. And I think a lot of people need to really start opening their eyes and also not cling to their science, because, as you said, a great scientist is always questioning things. If you look 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago, those scientists would be flabbergasted by what science is today. What makes a good scientist is that we don't know things, and that's how we can discover new things. And so I know, and I've had exposure to that academia at MIT, and I know how these people cling to the science. They're blinded by the science. It's the scientism. It's like a religion because it defines everything that they are. It defines their identity, their funding, their everything. And they, like you said, we're flawed as humans. And so it's important for everyone to understand that. So thank you so much. I look forward to these conversations.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll make it out for one of your Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind events in the future. That would be excellent.
It'd be great fun. Yep. All right. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Support this man. Head over to the archives and also help him with this crowdfunding site. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on London Real.